These are the facts. The Prime Minister stopped denying the facts, and if he really wants to contest and argue that he should be able to raise the tax, why doesn't he have the courage to call an election and let Canadians decide? The Prime Minister is a fake and a phony on this issue, just like on everything else. He sends...
Still no commitment from this government to fund what will be called the Canada Disability Benefit. When it came to MAID legislation, this government sure moved fast to make sure people with disabilities could die well. Will the Prime Minister show he's ready to ensure Canadians with disabilities live well by committing to a fully funded benefit by budget 2024?
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Oral questions, questions orales, l'honorable chef de l'opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
While common-sense Conservatives will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost, with the Parliamentary Budget Officer testifying again that the majority of households will see a negative impact as a result of the carbon tax. End quote. Now he wants to hike the tax on April Fool's Day. We won't stand for it. So what will it be with this Prime Minister? Will he spike the hike, or will he face a non-confidence vote at a carbon tax election?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report lays out clearly that 8 out of 10 Canadian families across the country where the price on pollution applies get more money back every year. That's how we put more money in the pockets of Canadians while having one of the strongest plans to fight climate change around the world. That's what the Conservative Party is standing against right now. Money in the pockets of Canadian families and a real plan to fight climate change that is working, Mr. Speaker, that is bringing down emissions, that is making us more competitive, that is helping build the future.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, I'm going to read again the testimony from the March 18th appearance of the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Once you factor in the rebate but also the economic impacts, the majority of households will see a negative impact as a result of the carbon tax. End quote. The Prime Minister plans to make this problem worse with a carbon tax hike on heat, on homes, on fuel, on food. We will not stand for it. So once again, which will it be? Will he spike the hike, or will we have a carbon tax election?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
What will it be, Mr. Speaker? It will be that Canadians get more money with the Canada carbon rebate. 80% of Canadian households in areas where the federal carbon tax applies get more money every year from the Canada carbon rebate than they pay in the price on pollution. On top of that, we are fighting climate change, making our industries more competitive, and preparing a better future. There is no plan on the Conservative side of the House to either help Canadians with rebate checks or fight climate change.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Not only did the Parliamentary Budget Officer testify that the majority of households will pay more in carbon taxes than they will get back in rebates, there is a table showing that every single province in which this tax applies, the middle-class families pay vastly more than they get back, and Canadians know it, because under this Prime Minister, they've seen their food, their fuel, their homes, their heating go through the roof. But why don't we just end the debate and let Canadians decide and have a carbon tax election?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, the Parliamentary Budget Officer clearly spelled out that 8 out of 10 Canadian families in areas where the price on pollution applies get more money back every year than they pay in the price on pollution. That's because we created a plan that not only is one of the strongest plans to fight climate change in the world, but it puts more money back in the pockets of middle-class Canadians as we build a stronger future, better careers, more competitiveness, and a safer environment for generations to come. That's the plan we have.
parties, there's been an outbreak of common sense on the carbon tax. In fact, Nova Scotia Liberals, NDPers, and Conservatives passed a unanimous motion in their legislature this week calling on their federal MPs to vote against the Prime Minister's 23% carbon tax hike. No wonder. The cost of the carbon tax to the average Nova Scotia family will be $1,605 according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer. $1,605. How much will be the rebate for the average family?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the federal price on pollution is a backstop. It's a system that we put in place to both fight climate change everywhere across the country and put more money back in the pockets of Canadian families where it applies. Every single province had and continues to have the option to replace the federal price on pollution with their own program as long as it is as rigorous and stringent as the federal price on pollution. As long as they have a plan to fight climate change, they can do what they want as long as it's strong enough. That's the options the provinces have. So they can take that option. We're going to keep putting...
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
That's demonstrably false because Nova Scotia actually has a climate change plan, which he rejected and overrode with a federal carbon tax that is opposed by New Democrats, Liberals, and Conservatives unanimously in the province's legislature. But you notice he wouldn't answer my question. He's been bragging about these rebates. But then when we talk about the cost, all of a sudden he forgets the rebates. So I'm going to give him a second chance. In the province of Nova Scotia, the cost to the average family will be $1,500. $1,500. $1,500 per Nova Scotia family. How much is the rebate?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, that is simply not true. The reality is, for 8 out of 10 families right across the country in backstop provinces, families do better off with the Canada carbon rebate than they do with the extra costs of the price on pollution. This is a plan to fight climate change, but it's also a plan to put more money in the pockets of families from coast to coast to coast. Now, the Conservative leader doesn't care about fighting against climate change, and he doesn't care about affordability either, because he would rip up the rebate checks and he would do less on fighting climate change. We're going to keep delivering for Canadians.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Still won't answer the question. All the Liberal ministers came in with little cue cards a week ago with all these rebates on them. They were waving them around, very proud. And then when we went to the Parliamentary Budget Officer and said, give us the full price by province, and we quoted that, for example, in Nova Scotia, it's $1,500 in cost to the average family, according to the PBO. Again, $1,500 in costs. What is the rebate? The number.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we see the lengths to which the Conservative Party will go to mislead Canadians about a plan that fights climate change and puts more money in the pockets out of 8 or 10 Canadian families. The Parliamentary Budget Officer himself admitted and said that you cannot take his words out of context because he did not calculate the costs of inaction on fighting climate change. He did not calculate the competitive advantages of the innovation and the solutions and the economic growth that comes with putting a price on pollution. The Conservative Party are not telling the full story.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, he did not, the Parliamentary Budget Officer did not include the cost of climate change because the carbon tax doesn't address the cost of climate change. The Parliamentary Budget Officer made clear the carbon tax will do nothing to change the cost of climate change, and that's why the tax costs more for every family in every province. So let's go to Alberta, where two of the NDP leadership candidates have come out against the carbon tax, and the Prime Minister's only friend in the province, Naheed Nenshi, has gone totally silent. Albertans will pay $2,900 in carbon tax per family. What will be the rebate for them?
Hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, $1,800 a year is the average, is the family of 4 in Alberta Canada carbon rebate. That is helping them, and according to an analysis by the Parliamentary Budget Officer, is more than they pay in extra price on pollution because of the price we put into the federal level. The price on pollution puts more money in the pockets out of 8 of 10 Canadian families and fights climate change while building a stronger, more competitive future. The Conservatives have no plan to fight climate change and no plan to help Canadians with rebate checks.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
All right, he found his cue card, and he finally talked about the rebate. So he says the average family in Alberta will get $1,800, while they pay $2,943. In other words, next year alone, after this forthcoming hike, the average Alberta family will pay $1,100 more in carbon taxes than he gives back in his phony checks. Will the Prime Minister tell us if he understands that $2,900 is bigger than $1,800?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, how about a different stat? A stat that the Finance Ministry analyzed turns out that for an average income quintile group, the average household of 2.5 Canadians, average net benefit per household in Alberta, $723 a year. Wow. That's $723 in the pockets of the average Albertan family because we put a price on pollution that puts more money back in the pockets out of 8 out of 10 Canadian families. That is what we are doing. That's how we fight climate change.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
He wants you to know, Mr. Speaker, he has alternative facts. I get mine from the parliamentary officer that reports directly to Parliament and is independent. He's using numbers that come from officials that report to him and depend on him for their job. So let's take another province, Ontario, where the Liberal leader has now come out against this Prime Minister's carbon tax. Maybe she knows that the average cost to an Ontario family of the federal carbon tax is $1,674 for this coming year. How much is the rebate in Ontario?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The average net benefit per household in Ontario is $255 a year. Wow. That is fighting climate change while putting more money in the pockets of Canadians. The Parliamentary Budget Officer himself demonstrated that 8 out of 10 Canadian families in regions that get the carbon price backstop do better with the price on pollution, put more money back in their pockets than it costs them on the fight for climate change. This is the plan we're delivering for Canadians. That's the plan he wants to scrap.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Now the legislature in Newfoundland and Labrador has acknowledged that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. After 8 years, they passed a motion supported by the Liberal Premier and personal friend of the Prime Minister to oppose the April 1st tax hike. They must have heard from the Parliamentary Budget Officer that the cost to Newfoundlanders of the carbon tax this year will be $1,874. $1,874 for the average Newfoundland and Labrador family. What will their rebate be?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, the average net benefit per household in Newfoundland and Labrador is $303 a year. That's the money that they pocket with our price on pollution and the Canada carbon rebate checks that go into households across the province. The province is open to creating its own price on pollution, its own plan to fight climate change. As long as it's as strong as the federal backstop, they're welcome to do that if they want to do it a different way. But for the meantime, we're going to both fight climate change and deliver more money to the families in Newfoundland and Labrador.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
So here are the facts from the Parliamentary Budget Officer. They're directly from him. The cost to the average Newfoundland family is $1,874. The rebate is $1,497 for a net cost of $377. A net loss of $377 and growing. These are the facts. The Prime Minister stopped denying the facts, and if he really wants to contest and argue that he should be able to raise the tax, why doesn't he have the courage to call an election and let Canadians decide?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, we are busy delivering for Canadians a price on pollution that puts more money in the pockets out of 8 out of 10 families across the country. And an election on the price on pollution, we had 3, Mr. Speaker, and we won them all.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
One more.
Wow. Then he shouldn't be afraid to have one more. This is the Prime Minister who has doubled housing costs. He sent 2 million people lining up at food banks, 8,000 joining a Facebook group learning how they can eat a meal out of a dumpster, and now his best solution is to hike the tax on their heat, on their homes, on their fuel, on their food. If he really believes in it, why doesn't he call a carbon tax election now?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, we've heard time and time again over these past many months the Leader of the Opposition talk about how Canada is broken. Well, Mr. Speaker, we are focused on supporting Canadians with things like childcare and dental care and a plan to fight climate change that puts more money in the pockets out of 8 of 10 Canadian families right across the country. That is the approach that is delivering for Canadians, and we've still got more work to do, and we're going to continue keep doing it to deliver for Canadians every single day we're in this House.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Finance Minister claimed that the carbon tax was revenue neutral, that it gave back, that the government didn't keep a single penny. Well, it turns out they keep hundreds of billions of pennies. They've collected so far $20.7 billion and only paid back $18.6 billion. In other words, they profited by over $2 billion by pillaging the pockets of Canadians. When will the Canadian people get their $2 billion back? And if he's sure about taking it away, why doesn't he call an election to defend it?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader is now complaining about $2 billion that he would never give to Canadian businesses, would never give to Canadians, because he would scrap the Canada carbon rebate. We are actually delivering money across the country to communities, to individuals, to small businesses, to Indigenous communities, to fight climate change and help afford their groceries. He wants to eliminate the carbon rebate. He wants to eliminate the plan to fight climate change. He has no plan for the future of the economy.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Prime Minister is not worth the cost to our economy. Real per-person GDP has grown slower in Canada than all the rest of the G7. Dead last. In fact, our per capita GDP is smaller than it was 5 years ago, the worst record since the Great Depression, and the Parliamentary Budget Officer calculates that the carbon tax will blow an $18 billion hole in the size of our GDP, $1,000 in economic cost per family. If he really thinks that's worth the cost, why won't we have a carbon election to...
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, at the same time, our population is growing faster than other countries around the world, if you're going to be telling the full story. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, our price on pollution puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadian families in the backstop provinces. This is a fact recognized by the Parliamentary Budget Officer and recognized by Canadians who see both a real plan to invest in the jobs and careers of the future, the competitiveness that Canada needs, and the fight against climate change to keep us safe, while putting more money in the pockets of Canadian families from coast to coast to coast.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The government gets bigger, the people get poorer. After 8 years, he's not worth the cost. He's blowing another $18 billion hole in our GDP with this carbon tax, a hole that will mean lower wages and a lower quality of life for the Canadian people. The Prime Minister now wants to quadruple the carbon tax, starting with his April Fool's Day hike. When will he realize that after 8 years of Canadians lining up in food banks and living in tents, he's not worth the cost?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the price on pollution returns every dollar that it collects to the jurisdictions in which it's collected. That is the fact that built our program, our fight against climate change. The reality is we're creating jobs, we're creating growth, and we're putting more money back in the pockets out of 8 out of 10 Canadian families in backstop provinces. This is the plan that fights climate change, builds a stronger economy, and supports Canadians right now with rebate checks that the Leader of the Opposition would cancel.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Based on his own main estimates and public accounts, he's collected over $20 billion in taxes and only returned $18 billion. So it is factually inaccurate to say that he's given every penny back. In fact, we know that in every single province where the carbon tax applies, Canadians pay more than they get back, and there is only one provincial party that supports the tax. The BC NDP is happily implementing this federally mandated tax grab. Will the Prime Minister today allow British Columbia to cancel the April Fool's Day tax hike?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in a question and a contrast on facts, the reality is the BC government has had a price on pollution since 2008, and the federal government has no involvement in British Columbia's price on pollution. It is a simple error of fact that the Leader of the Conservative Party is trying to share with this House. He must be mistaken. Maybe it's an honest mistake, but the reality is he is wrong on the fact on that, just like he's wrong on the fact that he doesn't understand that 8 out of 10 Canadian families do better with the price on pollution.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Page 75 of the BC budget confirmed that they were bringing in the tax hike on April 1st because they're forced to by federal law. And according to the Vancouver Sun, the NDP budget and fiscal plan presented in February says the carbon tax will raise $9 billion over 3 years. The New Democrats plan to give back $3.5 billion in climate action tax credits to low and middle income folks and spend the rest as they see fit. So will the Prime Minister end the carbon tax coalition with his provincial NDP BC counterparts so that British Columbians can get their money back?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
You'd think that for someone who's been railing against our plan to fight climate change and put more money in people's pockets for months now, he'd actually have done his research to understand how it works. Every single province has the ability to put forward their own plan to fight climate change as long as it is sufficiently rigorous to be fair to the other provinces that are also doing the same. That's what a Canada-wide plan to fight climate change is all about. Yes, the federal backstop gives back more money directly to Canadians in 8 out of 10 cases, but BC and others are free to do their own thing.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
We pulled money back from back office bureaucracy and costly consultants that now chew up the budget. CBSA is now spending $660 million on a Arrive scam while only 5 CBSA officers are monitoring 500,000 shipping containers at the Port of Montreal. Conservatives put more CBSA agents on the front line at the Port of Montreal and across the country. Won't he accept my common sense plan to cut back on the consultants and put boots on the ground?
I'd like to ask the honourable member from New Westminster Burnaby, please, to allow the questions to be asked and for answers to be given without interruption. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The Conservative government in which that leader was a minister cut hundreds, if not thousands, of positions in law enforcement across the country, including CBSA officers. And those back office experts who actually analyzed the bills of lading and the origins to designate and to find out where these auto thefts are happening, which containers have stolen vehicles in them, we're investing in them. We're giving more money so they can do their work. The common sense is nonsense that the Leader of the Opposition is putting forward. We know that they are all about cuts, not investments in keeping Canadians safe.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, why don't we just look at the CBSA's own numbers on this? In the first year of the Conservative government, there were a total of 12,673 CBSA officers. In the last year, there were 14,113. I know the Prime Minister's not great with numbers, but 14,000 is bigger than 12,000, right? And by the way, if he wants to analyze whether stolen cars are in shipping containers, why doesn't he accept my plan to scan those shipping containers? Wouldn't that be common sense?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'll let the Leader of the Opposition's high-priced corporate lobbyist friends who give him so much money at fancy catch for access private events explain to him the impact on supply chains and shipping in Canada to try and scan 600,000 containers a day, Mr. Speaker. The fact is, we are doing everything necessary to invest in countering organized crime, to track those containers and to do the work. He's not paying attention to the things that actually grow the country, even though he is listening to high-priced lobby.
The Honourable Member from Calgary Skyview.
Mr. Speaker, Calgary and my home province of Alberta is home to tens of thousands of proud Ukrainian Canadians. Since Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, Canada's commitment towards Ukraine has never been stronger, and it is why our government introduced a modernized Canada-Ukraine free trade agreement that President Zelensky asked for to be there to help Ukraine rebuild after they defeat Russia. Shamefully, the Conservative Party did not want to accept Ukraine's reasonable request for assistance. Can the Prime Minister update this House on this crucial trade agreement?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, after that Conservative leader turned his back on Ukrainians and forced his own caucus to do the same, he...
Colleagues, order, please. I'm going to ask the Prime Minister to start from the top.
Mr. Speaker, after that Conservative leader turned his back on Ukrainians and forced his own caucus to do the same, he whipped his senators last night to vote against the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement that Ukraine asked for. Our Liberal caucus, including the member for Calgary Skyview, never backed down. Despite the Conservative Party's efforts to derail Ukraine's hopes to rebuilding after they win the war, the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement received royal assent last night. While Conservative politicians sell out to the Kremlin, we will stand with Ukraine.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The $60 million Arrive scam is just the tip of the iceberg. We now learn that there are $5 million in additional fraud that has been identified by the Department of Public Procurement. And this is out of the $21 billion the Prime Minister is now spending on outside consultants, a 100% increase, and fully with the support of the NDP. Can the Prime Minister tell us how much of this $21 billion is fraud?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The situation is obviously unacceptable, which is why authorities are looking into this procurement process. Anyone who took advantage of our COVID response to save Canadian lives should face consequence. All federal contracts with these companies have been suspended as the investigation continues. But everyone in this House noticed how quickly he pivoted from a question on Ukraine. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, his members are ashamed of him for forcing him to vote against Ukrainian Canadians.
I'd like to remind the Prime Minister, please, to make sure that questions and comments are directed through the Chair. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister demonstrates once again he is a fake and he is a phony, because he's a fake and
I'm going to remind the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is a very experienced member of Parliament, and I know that he would understand that kind of a statement that directed to an individual would not be considered parliamentary. So I'll ask the Honourable Member to continue with this question.
The Prime Minister is a fake and a phony on this issue, just like on everything else. He sends...
Eric? The Honourable Member, again, is a very experienced member, and he knows that when the Speaker asks him to chastise us a little bit for the use of language which is not considered parliamentary, I'd ask him, please, to rephrase, to withdraw those comments, rephrase the question without using those words.
Mr. Speaker, this is a Prime Minister who authorized the export of gas turbines to pump gas from Putin's economy into Europe to fund the war. He's someone who signed on to allow Russian detonators to blow up Ukrainians on the battlefield, and he's a pro-Russia energy policy to fund the Russian economy. We'll take no less.
Prime Minister.
That is pretty weak sauce from the Leader of the Opposition. The reality is, President Zelensky...
I see that the opposition House Leader is asking members to be calm. I'm going to ask all House Leaders to please ask all of your members from all sides to be calm. So, and I'll ask in particular the member from Dufferin-Caledon, please, to hold on until he has the time to speak. So, the Honourable Prime Minister, please.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is flailing in every way he can to try and divert the attention from the fact that his members voted against a request by President Zelensky himself to support a Canada-Ukraine free trade deal. The reality is, his constituents across the country feel betrayed by the Conservative Party voting against Ukraine.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Ukrainians asked for us to give missiles that Conservatives support to Ukraine, not to give turbines and detonators to Russia, which is what he has done. He has failed Ukrainians abroad, and and he's failed Canadians at home. Canadians are good and decent people. They don't have to live this way. They do not have to give up the things they used to take for granted, like affordable food and homes, all for the incompetence and ego of one man. He is not worth the cost or the corruption. Will he call a carbon tax election so Canadians to decide?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, notice how desperate he is to try and find any excuse he can to justify their voting against Ukraine. Suddenly, he's not talking about the price on pollution that Ukraine put in itself years ago. He's not using that as an excuse, even though that was all we heard as the justification for why they voted against Ukraine, voted against Ukrainian Canadians, voted against the reconstruction of Ukraine that we are committed to through a free trade agreement. He stood in this House and voted against Ukraine and is now trying to do anything he can to hide from it. He let down Ukraine, and that showed who he is.
Mr. Speaker, thanks to the powerful advocacy of people with disabilities across the country, every MP in this House supported legislation meant to lift people with disabilities out of poverty. 9 months later, still no commitment from this government to fund what will be called the Canada Disability Benefit. When it came to MAID legislation, this government sure moved fast to make sure people with disabilities could die well. Will the Prime Minister show he's ready to ensure Canadians with disabilities live well by committing to a fully funded benefit by Budget 2024.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the member is better than that question that he just asked.